Hi everybody! Thank you so much for joining me on my channel today. Today I have a layout that I made for the Confessions of a Paper Addict Cut Files, 20 Days of Christmas and Summer Cut Files. Today is day 11 and the summer and the Christmas prompt for today was Wreath Cut File. Now I just used a Wreath cut file yesterday. That was a Christmas layout, and today I'm using a Wreath cut file, and that is for a summer theme. The name of this cut file is Shell Wreath, and if you would like to purchase it, it's available in the Confessions of a Paper Addict Etsy shop, and this is a perfect time to purchase this or any other of the cut files that are available in the shop. Everything is 25% off through the 20th. I started out this layout with a sheet of gessoed white cardstock, and I want to put some sprays on the background right behind where the wreath is going to be. I used a number of Art Anthology sprays. I used Ink Spot, I used Siesta Key, and I used another turquoisey color that is called Waimea Bay. I'm afraid to pronounce it incorrectly, so I just spelled it out for you. And I love the combination of these three colors. I use the packaging technique, and I'm also sprinkling some water over the top. Once the sprays have dried, sprinkling some water on top, and then taking that water off with some paper towel will create a really cool effect. It looks like little water droplets, and I always love using this technique, but I love using it the most on beach layouts because, of course, it makes the sprays look more like water. So I not only use a packaging technique, but I also added quite a few splatters to the background. And you could see that I'm using my heat tool and I am drying everything in between applications of color. Sometimes when I'm drying the sprays and there are little pools of color, I'll use some plastic and I'll try to squish those little pools down so that they spread out. And then afterwards I'll roll the paper towel on top so that any areas that won't spread out will get lifted up by the paper towel. I also wanted to add a little bit of coral to the background, just a tiny bit, because I know that this color is in the papers that I backed the cut file with. So I'm using a Lindy spray for this, and the name of the color is Cocklebells Coral. And I'm glad that I added that touch of coral. I think that it helps bring the cut file together with the background. Now I'm using a baby wipe and I'm cleaning up the layout a little bit. Once I have the layout cleaned up, I go back in with some more splatters, but what I should have done is I should have dried the area that I cleaned, because when I put the splatters down, they spread because the background was wet. So I dried the background and then I gave it another try. I added a few more splatters to the background. And then I went back and I added a little bit more of the coral color to the background. After I completed the splatters and I had allowed the background to dry, I added some modeling paste to the background, and I just love the texture that this gives to the layout. I'm using a stencil that doesn't have any manufacturer mark on it identifying where anybody could get this, but I feel that there are lots of stencils that are similar to this. It's big splashes, and I thought this would be a good choice since this is a beach layout. I'm using some Liquitex modeling paste, and if I wanted to make it more opaque, I could have put some white acrylic paint in with the modeling paste. That would make it more opaque and then also a little whiter, but I decided that I just wanted to put it on as is. If you look carefully at the layout, you can see that these are splashes of water, but I don't think that it's immediately apparent upon looking at the layout. But again, I really like the modeling paste and I like the dimension and the texture that it adds. So I'm spreading the modeling paste very thin, and this helps it to dry a little bit faster. And now I'm adding another one of my favorite touches, which is watered down white acrylic paint, and I'm splattering this all over the layout. And I feel that I like the way the background looks. I wasn't sure if I wanted to make it a little bit darker so that the cut file would stand out a little more, but I like the way it looks like water to me. So I decided that I was going to just ink the edges of the cut file, and hopefully that would make the cut file stand out from the background. And I have 3 colors out on my desk, but I ended up just using the Victorian Velvet and the Worn Lipstick Distress Oxides to ink the edges of the cut file. And I think that both of these colors go well with this collection. There is both a pink color and a coral color in the pattern papers. So I went back and forth between the Victorian Velvet and the Worn Lipstick. The Worn Lipstick is a little bit darker, so that will help to set the cut file apart from the background. For the coral that's on the cut file, I decided that I was going to use both of these colors and ink that on the surface as well as the edges. I wasn't sure if I should leave it white, but once I started inking it, I really liked the way it looked, so I just continued on. And you can see here that I put quite a number of coats along the edge because, again, I really wanted there to be a clear separation between the cut file and the background. And this is where I begin to ink the coral. I'm going to have other pieces of coral on the layout that are going to be the same color, and I also go back a little bit later in the process and I add more layers of the Distress Oxide to the coral. And then I used a number of coral dies that were in my stash to cut out a whole bunch of coral pieces from the pattern papers. And I didn't seem to catch it on video, but I did use my dauber and some of the Worn Lipstick and the Victorian Velvet Distress Oxide, and I inked all of the edges of all of those pieces. Then I used some adhesive fun foam and I popped up the wreath. And I didn't worry about what color I used except on the coral. Because the coral is so thin, I knew that it was possible that you might be able to see some of the foam from the top. So I used light blue foam because the background is light blue, and I thought that if you were able to see the color of the foam, it would be best that it matched the background. I used ATG adhesive on the majority of the wreath, and then for the coral pieces, I put some gel glue on the foam. And I arranged the wreath on the background. And now I'm ready to work on my photo. So this is a photo of my daughters from several years ago. We were in Cape Cod, and it was such a nice, beautiful, sunny day. So we took a whole lot of pictures this day. And I mounted the photo on some white cardstock, and then I'm using 3 of the pattern papers from the collection, and I'm going to layer those up and offset them a little bit. First, I'm using those 2 Distress Oxide colors, and I'm inking the edges of all of these papers. I love the combination of the blue, the yellow, and the pink. I think it's super pretty. Over to the left, you could see the few stickers that I have that are from this collection. And I'm going to try using those in a little bit. So now I'm layering up those papers behind the photo. The blue paper goes all the way around the back, but the pink and the yellow, I cut them a little shorter so that there would be a little interest in the paper layering. And then once I started attaching them together, I started to think, oh, it would be nice if the edges were distressed. But of course, I've already attached some of them. So I had to do a little bit of bending, but I was able to get in there with the scissors and distress the edges of all of the papers. And I really like the idea of having a weathered look on a beach layout because, of course, the elements at the beach cause a lot of things to get very weathered. So I think that it's a nice choice for a beach layout. And I'm going to pop up the photo. Since the wreath is popped up, I want the photo to be popped up as well. I fill in a small gap with a little piece of foam. And again, I'm going to use some ATG adhesive to hold it down. I'm going to center the photo, but I do put it at a slight angle for a little bit of interest. Now I'm going to take all of those coral die cuts and place them around the photo and then around the outside of the wreath as well. As I was adding the coral die cut pieces, I was thinking that I was adding them to the layout in the same way that I would add florals and stems to the layout. So I put a lot of the coral pieces around the outside of the wreath, and I am able to tuck those underneath the wreath because I use the ATG adhesive that's repositionable. And then I also put some on the inside. I put a number of the coral pieces on the left and the right side of the photo, and a few underneath the photo as well. I made the die cuts out of the pattern papers in the pad that looked like solids, but they're all actually pattern papers. And I really like to use pattern papers when I die cut things. I think that it's very rare to be able to tell what the pattern was of once you die cut the pieces. And I think that it gives the die cuts a look that's more interesting than if I just use some flat cardstock. When I say flat, I mean no variation in the color of the cardstock. I spend a decent amount of time arranging these coral pieces. I try to be careful about spreading out the different colors, and then I also want to be careful about not having too many of the same die cut right near each other. I have a few different dies that cut out coral shapes, and they're different sizes and different shapes, and I like that in the layout. I think that they're all brought together by the fact that they're the same color scheme, but I think that when you start looking at the layout, you can see that there are lots of variations among the different pieces of coral, and I just like the way that adds to the details in the layout. I was so happy to find this sticker that says summer is a state of mind. It was the perfect colors, and I was very happy with what the sticker said. I thought that was perfect choice for this layout, and it was also a good size. So I mounted it on a piece of the blue dotted pattern paper, and I inked the edges with the dauber that I had there on the table, and I popped up the top on some foam so that it would sit correctly on top of the photo. And that was one of the quickest title choices I ever made. I was very happy about that. Titles are a little bit of a struggle for me at times, so I'm always happy when I can find something that matches and is pre-made. Now I'm going to be adding a lot of jewels to the wreath, and the first jewels that I add are these little jewels that I got at a dollar store near me. I have seen them in many different colors over the years, and I really like these clear ones. I wish I had more of these because I've almost used up all the ones that I have, but they look to me like a little tiny sand dollar, like a very sparkly sand dollar, so I like using them on these types of beach layouts. I also use some Paper Studio dots. They are big blue iridescent dots. They don't have really small ones in the pack. I really wish they had them in a little bit of a smaller size to go with these larger ones. So for the blue ones, I add the 3 different sizes that are in that set. And then I also go in with some white jewels. They're in a very, very small size. I just add those as little accents around the layout. I don't add too many of them. I don't think they made a huge difference, but I did want to add some very small jewels to the layout. So then I did a little bit of fussing around with the coral that was in the upper right-hand corner, and then I added some of these iridescent dots to the layout, and these are very similar to the blue ones, except that they have kind of a pinkish cast to them, and they are available in a much smaller size than the blue ones. So I liked that smaller size, and so I'm scattering those around the layout as well. And I also wanted to mention that I used some Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White in a couple of spots on the layout to cover up some areas of the cut file that didn't look as white as they did before, and that helps to make the paper white again. I was thinking that it would be nice to add a little bit of sparkle to the coral that is part of the cut file. So I have these really, really tiny jewels. I also got those in a dollar store, and I cut those into pieces. They were in a line, but I cut them into individual pieces, and I placed those in a couple of different places on the coral. I use an EK Success Photo Corner punch, and I cut some photo corners out of the coral paper, and I ink the edges, and then I go around to each of them and I attach those down with the ATG adhesive. I was thinking I might put the smallest of those iridescent dots on each of the photo corners, but then I was thinking that some of the dots then would be covered up by the title, so I decided instead to use those very, very tiny jewels that I used on the coral, and those fit perfectly on the photo corners, and I think that they added just the right amount of sparkle to the photo. So now I'm going in and I'm roughing up and distressing the papers around the photo a little bit more. I like using the highly distressed look, but just in limited places on the layout. I think that if you use it in just one or two places, it draws attention to those areas. I just did the same thing on the wreath layout that I recently created. I like when there's a large circular element in the center of the page to put something in the corners. So I'm using a punch. This is an EK Success punch, and it punches out these very pretty little scrolls, and I think that they're the perfect addition to the corners of the layout. So I ink the edges, and then I attach them down to each of the corners. And I did reposition them a couple of times to get them in just the right spot. I also added a shell on top of the sunglasses that were on the title. Not that I didn't like the sunglasses, but I just thought that this shell fit perfectly there and went with the layout a little bit more. And I put a little bit of Distress Oxide on the shell so it wouldn't be stark white. And that completes the layout, and here are some close-ups. I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll take a look in the description box. You will find links to the channels of all the other scrapbookers who are creating layouts using these beautiful cut files during the 20 days of Christmas and summer cut files. I'll see you soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.